She stood in front of me, smiling like she had already won. "You're nothing," my own sister said, and everyone agreed. I swallowed it, walked away, disappeared like they wanted. Years passed. No calls. No apologies. Just silence, and something growing in the dark. Then one day I came back. Same family. Same house. But everything had changed. Because the company she built? It's mine now. So tell me, would you forgive, or take it all back? Brooklyn stopped at the edge of the driveway, the wind tugging lightly at her coat as the old wooden door creaked in the distance. For a moment, she didn't move. Her eyes traced every crack in the walls, every detail she had once memorized. Nothing had changed, except her. A faint laugh slipped from her lips, quiet but sharp. "Still the same house," she murmured, almost to herself, then added under her breath, "I wonder if the people inside are." The air felt heavier with each step she took forward. Her hand hovered near the gate, hesitating just long enough to betray the storm beneath her calm. Voices echoed in her memory, cold, dismissive, final. "You're nothing." She inhaled slowly, steadying herself, then pushed the gate open. It groaned louder than she expected. Good. Let them hear. Let them feel it coming. Inside, the lights were on. Of course they were. They always were when everything looked perfect on the surface. Brooklyn's gaze hardened, a flicker of something unreadable passing through her eyes. "Do you remember what you said to me?" she whispered, though no one could hear her yet. A pause. Then a sharper edge. "You will." She stepped closer, heels clicking against the ground in slow, deliberate rhythm. Each step wasn't just movement, it was a countdown. The closer she got, the more the past pressed in, but it no longer held her back. Not tonight. Because while they had gone on with their lives, believing she had disappeared, Brooklyn had been building something in silence. And the truth? They had no idea what was about to walk through that door. As Brooklyn stood there, fingers still resting against the cold metal gate, the shape of her past settled into something unmistakable. It wasn't just about what was said tonight. It was about who she had always been in this house and who she was never allowed to be. Vanessa had filled every space before Brooklyn could even step into it. Brighter smile. Louder laugh. Easier charm. "Vanessa, come sit next to me," their mother would say, gently pulling her closer, while Brooklyn remained at the edge of the table, unnoticed unless something went wrong. At first, Brooklyn tried to ignore it. Then she tried to compete. That was the mistake. Because every effort only made the gap feel wider. "You're trying too hard," Vanessa once said with a soft, almost sympathetic smile. "It's not a good look." It sounded harmless. It wasn't. Brooklyn remembered nodding, pretending to agree, while something inside her quietly tightened. She studied longer, spoke less, observed more. If she couldn't outshine her sister, maybe she could at least not disappoint. For a brief moment, it almost worked. A teacher praised her. A small project got noticed. "That's fine," her father said, already distracted. Then he turned to Vanessa. Always back to Vanessa. Brooklyn exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the door ahead. Was I ever even in the same story? The thought came uninvited, but it stayed. Because deep down, she had started to measure herself the way they did, against someone she was never meant to be. And that quiet comparison? It didn't just hurt. It reshaped everything she believed about herself. The question lingered longer than Brooklyn expected, and once it surfaced, it began pulling memories with it, small moments at first, almost harmless on their own, but together, they told a different story. It showed up at dinner tables where her words were cut short. "Let Vanessa finish," her mother would say, even when Brooklyn had been speaking first. It echoed in school events, where Brooklyn scanned the crowd, hoping to catch her parents' eyes, only to realize they were already focused on her sister, smiling, proud, fully present. At first, Brooklyn told herself it didn't matter. Then she started keeping score. One compliment for Vanessa. None for her. One celebration. One quiet nod. The pattern repeated so often it stopped feeling like coincidence. "You did okay," her father would say after Brooklyn brought home a top grade, his tone flat, almost distracted. A second later, "Vanessa got another award today." And just like that, the moment shifted away from her. Brooklyn tried to adjust. She raised her standards, thinking maybe excellence would finally be enough. Late nights turned into routine. Notes filled entire notebooks. For a brief stretch, it felt different. A teacher praised her in front of the class. A project she led actually stood out. She came home that day with something close to excitement. "Mom, she started," but her mother interrupted gently, not unkindly, just uninterested. "That's nice, honey. Did you hear about Vanessa's internship?" The words didn't sting immediately. They sank in slowly, settling somewhere deeper. Brooklyn smiled, because that was easier than reacting. But something inside her shifted again, quieter this time, more permanent. She stopped expecting recognition. Stopped volunteering answers at the table. Stopped believing effort would change anything. And yet, she kept trying. Not for them anymore, but because she didn't know how to stop. Still, there was one moment, one specific day, that refused to blur like the rest. One conversation that didn't fade. One sentence that cut deeper than all the others combined. And that was the moment everything started to change. That moment didn't arrive quietly. It came on a night that was supposed to feel normal, one of those family dinners where everything looked perfect from the outside. The table was full, laughter drifted easily, and Vanessa sat at the center, telling a story about her latest achievement. Brooklyn listened, as usual, nodding at the right moments, waiting for a pause that might let her speak. When it finally came, she took it. "I've been working on something too," Brooklyn said, her voice careful but steady. For a second, a few heads turned. A small opening. She continued, explaining her idea, the effort behind it, the time she had invested. It wasn't grand, but it was hers. Vanessa tilted her head, smiling faintly. "That sounds cute," she said, dragging the last word just enough to shift the tone. A couple of relatives chuckled softly. Brooklyn's chest tightened, but she kept going, trying to hold on to the moment. Then Vanessa leaned back, her voice louder now. "I mean, let's be honest. Brooklyn has always liked pretending she's doing something big." The laughter this time wasn't quiet. It spread across the table, easy, effortless. Brooklyn froze. Her fingers curled under the table, nails pressing into her palm. She looked around, waiting, just waiting, for someone to interrupt, to correct it, to say it wasn't fair. Her mother lowered her gaze. Her father took a sip of water, silent. No one stopped it. "Come on, don't be so serious," Vanessa added lightly, as if it were harmless. Brooklyn forced a smile, because that was what she had learned to do. Release the moment. Let it pass. But something inside didn't move on this time. Why is no one saying anything? The question hit harder than the words themselves. And in that instant, Brooklyn understood something she hadn't fully accepted before. This wasn't just how things were. This was who they had chosen to believe. That night didn't break Brooklyn the way anyone might have expected. It shifted something quietly but permanently. Instead of arguing, instead of trying to prove herself at that table again, she pulled back. The noise faded, and in its place, a different kind of focus began to form. Days later, she sat alone in her room, the soft glow of her laptop lighting up the darkness. A blank document stared back at her. For a moment, she hesitated. Then her fingers moved. It started small, just an idea she couldn't ignore. A concept shaped by everything she had observed, every detail she had quietly absorbed while no one was paying attention. She wrote, paused, adjusted, then kept going. Notes filled the screen. Pages turned into plans. For the first time in a long while, her thoughts weren't interrupted, dismissed, or compared. They were hers fully, undeniably hers. Hours passed without her noticing. The world outside blurred, but inside that room, something steady began to build. A structure. A direction. She leaned back, exhaling slowly, eyes scanning what she had created. This could actually work, she whispered, almost surprised by her own voice. The next day, she did something she hadn't done in a long time. She shared it. Carefully, cautiously, she explained the idea to someone at school. This time, there was no laughter. No interruption. Just a pause, then a nod. Wait, the girl said, leaning forward, this is really smart. Brooklyn blinked, caught off guard. A small reaction, but it landed deeper than expected. For a brief moment, something unfamiliar surfaced, relief. Not overwhelming, not loud, but real. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't invisible after all. For the first time, Brooklyn allowed herself to hold on to that feeling a little longer. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make her believe she might finally be onto something real. So she worked harder. Refined the idea. Added details, structure, direction. Late nights became routine again, but this time, it felt different. There was purpose behind every hour. And then, almost without thinking too much about it, she made a choice that felt natural at the time. She shared it with Vanessa. Can I show you something? Brooklyn asked one evening, standing hesitantly at her sister's door. Vanessa glanced up from her phone, mildly curious. Sure. What is it? Brooklyn walked her through everything, the concept, the strategy, even the parts she wasn't fully confident about yet. She expected criticism, maybe even dismissal. But instead, Vanessa nodded slowly, a faint smile forming. It's actually interesting, she said. Just that. Nothing more. But for Brooklyn, it was enough. A small release. A moment that almost felt like approval. Days passed. Then weeks. Life moved on, and Brooklyn kept building quietly in the background. Until one morning, everything shifted. She walked into the living room and saw the screen first. A presentation. A logo. Familiar colors. Familiar structure. Too familiar. Wait. What is this? Brooklyn asked, her voice tightening. Vanessa didn't look surprised. She stood confidently beside the screen, addressing the family and a few guests Brooklyn didn't recognize. My new project, Vanessa said smoothly. I've been working on it for a while. Brooklyn's heart dropped. Every word, every detail, it was hers. Just polished, repackaged, and already in motion. You took it, Brooklyn said, barely above a whisper. Vanessa turned, meeting her eyes without hesitation. You weren't doing anything with it, she replied. Ideas don't matter unless someone actually uses them. The room stayed silent. No one questioned it. No one asked where it came from. Brooklyn stood there frozen, the weight of it settling in all at once. Not just the loss, but the realization. This time, it wasn't subtle. It wasn't indirect. It was deliberate. And somehow, she knew this wasn't the worst part yet. Brooklyn didn't move right away. The words still hung in the air, sharp and unreal, as if the room itself hadn't fully processed what had just happened. But someone had to say something. Someone had to question it. Mom. Dad, you heard that, right? Her voice came out tighter than she expected. Her mother glanced at Vanessa, then back at Brooklyn, her expression unreadable. It's not a big deal, she said quietly. Vanessa is just taking initiative. Initiative. The word landed harder than the accusation. Brooklyn blinked, trying to steady herself. She didn't come up with it. I showed her everything. You know that. Her father exhaled slowly, as if the conversation itself was inconvenient. Then you should have acted faster, he replied. In the real world, ideas don't wait. A small pause. A crack. Something inside Brooklyn shifted again, this time, not quietly. So that's it, she asked, her voice lower now, more controlled. She takes something that isn't hers, and that's fine? Vanessa didn't even respond. She didn't need to. The silence around the table had already answered. Brooklyn, her mother added, softer this time, almost like a warning, don't make this into something bigger than it is. Don't make it bigger. Brooklyn let out a short breath, something between a laugh and disbelief. Bigger than it is? The room felt smaller with every second, the walls closing in, the air heavier than before. She looked at each of them, really looked this time. No hesitation. No guilt. No one stepping forward. Right, she whispered. The anger didn't explode. It built. Slow, steady, controlled. A different kind of fire. So this is what it is, she thought. This is what I am to them. Her fingers curled at her side, nails pressing into her palm again, grounding her. I don't have anyone here. And for the first time, she didn't feel surprised by that thought. Brooklyn didn't argue anymore. There was nothing left to defend, not in a room where the outcome had already been decided without her. The silence stretched, heavy and final, and for the first time, she didn't try to fill it. Instead, she turned. Slow. Certain. Okay, she said quietly, more to herself than to them. No one stopped her. That alone told her everything. Upstairs, her room felt smaller than ever, like it no longer belonged to her. She stood in the middle for a moment, eyes scanning the familiar space, books, notes, the laptop still open with her unfinished work. A life she had tried to build here. She reached for a small suitcase, hands steady despite the storm inside. Clothes went in first. Then the essentials. Nothing more. There wasn't much she felt like keeping. Downstairs, the house remained unchanged. Voices resumed. Laughter returned. As if she had already disappeared. Brooklyn paused at the door, her fingers brushing against the handle. Just 1 second. Just enough to ask herself a final question. Is there anything here worth staying for? The answer came faster than she expected. She stepped outside. The night air hit differently, colder, sharper, real. The street was quiet, the sky dark, the world wider than it had ever felt before. Behind her, the house stood still, lights glowing warmly, untouched by what had just happened. Don't be dramatic, Brooklyn, her mother's voice echoed faintly from inside. Brooklyn didn't turn back. Her grip tightened on the suitcase. No money. No plan. No one waiting for her on the other side. Just distance. Each step forward felt heavier, but also clearer. Because this time, she wasn't being pushed out. She was choosing to leave. The first few days felt unreal, like she was moving through someone else's life. Then reality settled in fast, unforgiving, and constant. Brooklyn found a cheap place to stay, barely enough space for a bed and a small desk. It didn't matter. She wasn't there to be comfortable. She was there to survive. Morning started before the sun. Coffee shop shifts. Long hours on her feet. You're late again, her manager snapped one day. She wasn't, but she didn't argue. She couldn't afford to. By afternoon, she rushed to another job, stacking shelves, lifting boxes, pretending her arms didn't ache. Nights were the hardest. Back in her room, the silence pressed in, heavier than anything she faced during the day. Still, she opened her laptop. Every night. No exceptions. At first, progress was slow. Ideas didn't flow the way they used to. Exhaustion blurred her focus. She made mistakes, lost small opportunities. Once, she pitched a rough version of her idea to someone who barely listened. "It's not strong enough," they said flatly before walking away. Brooklyn stood there for a second too long, forcing herself not to react. Another day, she miscalculated her savings. Rent was due sooner than expected. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the numbers. For a brief moment, doubt slipped in, quiet but sharp. What if they were right? She closed her eyes, inhaled slowly, then pushed the thought aside. Not because it didn't matter, but because she couldn't let it stay. Days blurred into weeks. The routine didn't get easier. Her body stayed tired. Her mind stayed stretched thin. Small failures kept stacking, nothing dramatic, just enough to wear her down piece by piece. But every time she reached that edge, she made the same choice. She kept going. No one saw it. No one acknowledged it. But something was still moving forward, even if it didn't look like progress yet. And somehow, through all of it, she never stopped. Somewhere between exhaustion and repetition, something in Brooklyn stopped breaking and started hardening instead. It didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic turning point, no sudden realization. Just a quiet shift built from too many nights of being ignored, too many days of pushing through without anyone noticing. One night, she stood in front of the small mirror in her room, barely more than a reflection in dim light. For a second, she almost looked away. Then she didn't. Her eyes stayed locked on her own. Tired, yes. Worn down, definitely. But not empty. Not anymore. "So this is who I am now," she whispered, her voice low, testing the weight of it. Silence answered back. But it wasn't the same silence as before. She leaned closer, studying every detail, the tension in her jaw, the steadiness returning to her gaze. "No," she said, sharper this time. "This isn't where it ends." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. That night, she didn't just open her laptop out of habit. She opened it with direction. The scattered notes from before began to take shape again, but this time, they were different, more focused, more deliberate. She wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. She was building something. Step by step, she redefined the idea. Stripped away what didn't matter. Strengthened what did. She set small targets, clear and measurable. Not dreams, plans. Outside, nothing changed. The job stayed exhausting. The failures didn't disappear. But internally, the narrative shifted. Every setback became data. Every rejection, feedback. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Brooklyn stopped asking if she was enough. She already had her answer. Once Brooklyn stopped questioning her worth, her focus sharpened in a way it never had before. The work didn't suddenly become easier, but it became clearer. Each night, she returned to her laptop with intention, no longer chasing approval, only progress. At first, the changes were almost invisible. She adjusted small details in her plan, tested different approaches. Some failed quickly. Others lasted a little longer before collapsing. Still, she didn't step back. "Okay, that doesn't work," she would mutter under her breath, already rewriting the next version. No hesitation. No self-pity. Just movement. During the day, between shifts, she scribbled ideas on receipts, on her phone, anywhere she could. Patterns started to form. Mistakes repeated themselves until they didn't. Slowly, she began recognizing what mattered and what didn't. One evening, something clicked. A small feature she had been struggling with finally worked the way she intended. She stared at the screen for a second, almost unsure. Then a quiet smile appeared. "That's it," she whispered. Not a breakthrough anyone else would notice, but to her, it was everything. Moments like that began to stack. A better pitch. a clearer structure, a conversation that lasted longer than before. Once, someone didn't walk away immediately. Instead, they asked a question. Just one, but it meant they were listening. "Tell me more about this part," the man said, pointing at her draft. Brooklyn leaned forward, her voice steady. She didn't rush this time. She explained, expanded, owned it. The progress wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Each step carried her slightly further than the last. And with every small win, something inside her grew, not confidence in the way she used to think about it, but certainty. She wasn't hoping anymore. She was building. The shift didn't announce itself. It slipped in quietly, disguised as just another ordinary day. Brooklyn almost missed it. She had just finished a long shift, her hands still faintly smelling of coffee, when she checked her email out of habit. Most of it was the same: rejections, silence, automated replies. She was about to close it when one subject line caught her attention. No flashy words. Just a name she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then clicked. "Hi Brooklyn, I came across your proposal." Her eyes slowed. Read it again. And again. The message wasn't long, but it was different. Specific. Thoughtful. Whoever wrote it had actually read her work. Not skimmed, understood. She leaned back slightly, her pulse picking up. "Wait, is this real?" she whispered. "A meeting request. A time. A place." Brooklyn stared at the screen, the noise of the cafe fading into the background. For a second, doubt tried to surface. What if it's nothing? But it didn't hold. Not this time. That evening, she prepared differently. Not rushed. Not desperate. Focused. She reviewed every detail, anticipating questions, refining her answers. The next day, she walked into a space that felt far removed from everything she had been living. Clean lines. Glass walls. Quiet confidence in the air. The man across from her didn't waste time. "You've been building this alone?" he asked, flipping through her material. "Yes," Brooklyn answered, steady. A pause. Then he looked up, more interested now. "That's rare." The conversation shifted. Deeper. Sharper. He challenged her assumptions. Tested her logic. She didn't back down. Not once. Minutes stretched into something more significant. And then another pause. Longer this time. "I think there's something here," he said slowly. Brooklyn didn't react immediately. She just held his gaze, processing the weight behind those words. Because this wasn't just interest. It was the first real door opening. And she had no idea yet how far it would take her. That door didn't just open, it pulled Brooklyn forward faster than she expected. What began as a single conversation quickly turned into a chain of opportunities she had no time to overthink. Meetings followed. Feedback sharpened. Deadlines appeared almost overnight. "You'll need to move faster," the investor said during their second session, sliding a revised timeline across the table. Brooklyn glanced at it, her mind already calculating. "I can handle it," she replied, though she knew it would cost her everything she had left. And it did. Days blurred into each other again, but this time, not from survival. From acceleration. She cut back hours at one job, then another. Risky. Necessary. Every decision now carried weight. Every mistake had consequences that reached further than before. At night, her screen stayed lit longer. Code, structure, strategy, everything evolved at a speed she hadn't faced before. Some parts held. Others broke under pressure. "Fix it," she whispered to herself, already rewriting, already adapting. No pause. No retreat. Then came the first shock. A prototype she had rushed together, something she considered unfinished, caught attention faster than expected. A small group tested it. The response wasn't perfect, but it wasn't dismissive either. One comment stood out. This feels different. Brooklyn read that line twice. Different meant something. It meant she wasn't invisible anymore. Momentum built. Calls increased. People who once ignored her now responded within hours. Not out of kindness, but because they saw potential. Real, measurable potential. Still, the pressure didn't ease. It sharpened. Expectations rose. The margin for error narrowed. One night, staring at multiple open tabs, Brooklyn paused for a fraction of a second. Is this actually happening? She didn't sit with the question for long. Because right after that, something shifted again. Not loud, not obvious, but enough to change the direction entirely. That shift didn't feel accidental the more Brooklyn looked at it. Patterns started to connect. Names repeated. Market moves aligned a little too closely with something she already knew, something she had once built from nothing. She didn't react immediately. She observed. Quietly. One night, she sat in front of her screen, scrolling through a company profile she hadn't searched in years. Vanessa's company. Clean branding. Confident messaging. Familiar structure. Brooklyn's fingers paused on the trackpad. So this is how far you've taken it, she murmured, her tone unreadable. The resemblance wasn't exact anymore. It had evolved, but the foundation was still there. Her foundation. Instead of anger, something colder settled in. Focus. From that moment, Brooklyn made a decision she didn't say out loud. She would get closer. Not emotionally. Strategically. She began with small steps. Public information. Investor reports. Product updates. Everything Vanessa's company released, Brooklyn studied it line by line, detail by detail. Where are the gaps? She whispered one night, eyes narrowing at the screen. There were always gaps. Weeks passed, and her approach sharpened. Through her own growing network, she started hearing things: internal shifts, quiet concerns, unexplained delays. Nothing obvious, but enough. Then came the first move. A subtle connection. A shared contact. A conversation that didn't mention her name, but pointed her closer to the company's inner circle. Interesting timing, one investor said during a call, unaware of how closely Brooklyn was listening. She didn't interrupt. She didn't reveal anything. Not yet. Because this wasn't about reacting anymore. It was about positioning. And the closer she got, the clearer her path became. The closer Brooklyn moved, the less it felt like observation and more like execution. Every detail she had been collecting, every quiet connection she had built, began to align into something far more deliberate. It wasn't just about understanding Vanessa's company anymore. It was about entering it. At first, the moves were invisible. Small investments placed through intermediaries. Minor shares acquired in rounds no one paid much attention to. It's just another investor, someone had said during a call, brushing it off without a second thought. Brooklyn didn't correct them. She let the assumption stand. Weeks turned into months, and the pattern deepened. Each step calculated. Each entry point chosen with precision. She never rushed. Never revealed the full picture. Even the investor who had backed her didn't see the entire strategy at once. Are you sure about this direction? He asked during one late meeting, reviewing the allocation reports. Brooklyn didn't look away. I am, she answered simply. Another pause. Then he nodded. Because the numbers made sense. From the outside, nothing seemed unusual. Vanessa's company continued to grow. New partnerships. Expanding reach. Confident projections. Everything pointed upward. But beneath that surface, ownership was shifting. Quietly. Gradually. Brooklyn watched it happen in real time, her screen filled with data most people would overlook. Percentages changing. Influence increasing. Not yet, she whispered once, fingers hovering above the keyboard. Almost. Then came the moment that changed everything. A final acquisition. Small on paper, critical in reality. The kind that doesn't make headlines but rewrites control. Brooklyn leaned back, eyes steady, processing the updated structure. For the first time, the full picture was clear. Not just to her, but to anyone who could read it closely enough. She wasn't on the outside anymore. She was inside. And not just as a participant. As someone with power. The realization settled in slowly, but once it did, it couldn't be undone. Because this had never been about getting close. It had always been about taking control. And the truth? No one in that company, not even Vanessa, had realized who they had just handed it to. Once Brooklyn stepped inside, she didn't rush to reveal herself. Control, she had learned, wasn't about noise, it was about timing. So she stayed exactly where she needed to be, present but unseen. The reports kept updating. Percentages shifted in small increments, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. She watched every change with precision, tracking influence the way others tracked profit. Increase here, hold there, she murmured during one late-night review, adjusting her next move before anyone else even noticed a pattern forming. Inside the company, things felt stable. Vanessa moved with the same confidence as always, leading meetings, making decisions, believing every step was still hers to control. "We're expanding faster than expected," Vanessa said during a presentation, her voice steady, assured. Brooklyn listened from a distance. Not physically in the room, but close enough to hear everything that mattered. Because now, she didn't need to be seen to be present. Each board update gave her more weight. Each silent vote shifted alignment just enough. Not dramatic. Not obvious. But real. One investor questioned a minor decision. Another hesitated before agreeing on a new direction. Small cracks. Subtle, but growing. Brooklyn noticed them all. "Not yet," she whispered again, eyes scanning the data. "Let it build." She wasn't trying to stop Vanessa. Not immediately. That would have been too obvious. Too early. Instead, she let the system move naturally, while quietly redirecting its outcome. And the closer she got to full control, the more fragile everything around Vanessa became, without her even realizing it. Because from Vanessa's perspective, nothing had changed. But in reality, everything already had. At first, the changes were too small for Vanessa to name, but not small enough to ignore. A delayed response in a meeting. A vote that didn't land as easily as it should have. She brushed it off once. Then twice. By the third time, her smile tightened just a little longer than usual. "Why was this pushed back?" she asked during one meeting, her tone calm but edged. A brief pause. Someone answered, but not with the certainty she expected. Vanessa didn't react immediately. She nodded, let it pass, kept the room moving. But her eyes lingered on the reports longer after everyone left. Something wasn't aligning. Not enough to prove, just enough to feel. Days later, it happened again. A minor proposal, something routine, met with unexpected hesitation. Not rejection. Just resistance. Subtle. Controlled. "That's unusual," she murmured under her breath, fingers tapping lightly against the table. Across the room, no one met her gaze for more than a second. The pattern deepened. Small inconsistencies began to stack. A timeline shifted without clear explanation. A partner questioned terms that had already been agreed on. Nothing broke, but nothing flowed the same way either. Vanessa adjusted. Of course she did. She pushed harder in meetings, spoke with more authority, reasserted control wherever she could. "We're not changing direction," she said firmly during one call. "We stay on track." The words sounded right. But something underneath them didn't hold as strongly as before. Late one night, alone in her office, she opened the latest ownership report. Her eyes scanned the numbers quickly at first, then slowed. A fraction here. A shift there. Nothing alarming. And yet, her hand stilled on the page. "Who's been moving positions?" she asked quietly, though no one was there to answer. The room stayed silent. But for the first time, Vanessa didn't feel in control of it. By the time the invitation arrived, Vanessa had already been feeling it, the subtle shifts, the quiet resistance, the sense that something beneath her control was moving without her. The event was meant to reinforce her position. A high-profile corporate gathering. Investors, partners, media. A perfect stage to reassert dominance. She stepped into the venue with confidence, heels sharp against the polished floor, posture flawless. Conversations paused just slightly as she passed. Good. That was expected. That was normal. Until it wasn't. Across the room, near the far end of the glass-lit hall, someone else had just entered. No announcement. No introduction. But the energy shifted anyway. Vanessa's eyes followed the movement almost instinctively. At first, she didn't recognize her. The silhouette was familiar, but different. Composed. Controlled. Then it clicked. Brooklyn. For a fraction of a second, everything around Vanessa blurred. The noise, the voices, the rhythm of the event, it all dropped away. "That's not possible," she whispered, barely audible. But Brooklyn was already walking toward her. Step by step. Calm. Measured. Each movement deliberate. No hesitation. No uncertainty. People began to notice. Heads turned. Conversations slowed. Something was happening. They could feel it, even if they didn't understand it yet. Vanessa straightened, instinctively regaining her composure. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly as Brooklyn stopped in front of her. Brooklyn didn't react immediately. She studied Vanessa for a moment, her gaze steady, almost detached. Then, a faint smile appeared. Not warm. Not forgiving. "Funny," she replied softly. "I was about to say the same thing." A pause. Tension tightened, sharp and visible. Vanessa searched her face, trying to read what had changed, because something had. Not just confidence. Something deeper. "What are you doing here?" Vanessa asked again, this time with less control. Brooklyn tilted her head slightly, as if considering how much to reveal. "I think," she said, her voice low but clear, "you're about to find out." And just like that, the room no longer belonged to Vanessa. Brooklyn didn't move after that. Not immediately. The space between them held, tight and charged, as if the entire room had paused to watch what she would do next. Vanessa was still speaking, something about timing, about control, but the words barely registered. Because Brooklyn wasn't listening anymore. She was remembering. A flicker, "You're nothing." Another, laughter around the table. A door closing behind her. Cold nights. Empty rooms. Her jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Vanessa took a step closer. "If you think showing up here changes anything," Brooklyn cut her off, not loudly, but with enough weight to stop the sentence midair. "Changes anything," she repeated, her voice steady, almost too calm. A brief silence followed. The kind that doesn't ease tension, it sharpens it. Inside, everything was aligning. Not chaos. Not emotions spilling out uncontrollably. Something more precise. Every memory, every dismissal, every quiet humiliation, it didn't blur together. It stacked. Layer by layer. You walked away with nothing. You weren't fast enough. No one chose you. Her fingers curled slightly at her side, grounding herself. Not from weakness, but from control. Vanessa frowned, just for a second. She felt it now. Something shifting that she couldn't immediately name. Brooklyn inhaled slowly, her gaze never leaving her sister's. "Do you ever wonder," she said, softer this time, "what happens when the person you pushed out doesn't disappear?" No answer came. Of course it didn't. Because this moment wasn't about conversation anymore. It was about release. And Brooklyn could feel it building, steady, contained, inevitable. Right on the edge of breaking. Brooklyn let the silence stretch just a second longer, long enough for every eye in the room to settle on her, long enough for Vanessa's confidence to start cracking at the edges. Then she stepped forward. Not rushed. Not hesitant. "Let's stop pretending," Brooklyn said, her voice calm, but it carried. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa's expression hardened. "You don't get to come in here and no," Brooklyn cut in, sharper this time. "You don't get to rewrite what happened." The room went still. Brooklyn's gaze didn't waver. "You took my idea. You stood in our house, in front of everyone, and called it yours. And they let you." Her voice rose slightly, not out of loss of control, but because she chose it. "They all sat there and watched me disappear." A ripple moved through the crowd. Someone whispered. Someone else looked away. Vanessa scoffed, trying to recover. "You're exaggerating. You had nothing solid. I built that company." Brooklyn stepped closer, the distance between them nearly gone. "You built it on something that wasn't yours," she said, each word precise. "And you knew exactly where it came from." A pause. Heavy. "You told me I was nothing," Brooklyn continued, quieter now, but somehow more cutting. "Do you remember that?" "Because I do. Every word. Every time." Vanessa opened her mouth, then stopped. Brooklyn didn't give her space to recover. "You didn't just take an idea. You took the only moment I thought I mattered. And when I tried to fight for it, you all turned away." Her breath steadied, but her eyes burned with something deeper than anger now. "I walked out with nothing," she said. "No support. No backup. Just silence. Another step. But I didn't stay nothing." The words landed harder than anything before. Because this time, Brooklyn wasn't asking to be heard. She was making sure they couldn't ignore her anymore. Brooklyn didn't raise her voice after that. She didn't need to. The room was already leaning toward her, pulled in by something stronger than volume, certainty. Vanessa tried to recover, her posture tightening. "Even if any of that were true," she said, forcing a thin smile, "it doesn't change where we are now." Brooklyn tilted her head slightly, almost thoughtful. "You're right," she replied. "It doesn't." A brief pause. Just long enough to shift the air again. Then she reached into her bag and placed a thin folder on the table between them. Not dramatic. Not rushed. Deliberate. "Take a look," Brooklyn said. Vanessa hesitated for a fraction of a second, then opened it. Pages. Numbers. Ownership structures. Legal confirmations. Her expression didn't change immediately, but her eyes slowed. Focused. Stopped. "What is this?" she asked, her voice no longer steady. Brooklyn didn't step back. "It's the current distribution of shares," she answered calmly. "Updated this morning." Vanessa flipped another page. Then another. Her breathing shifted, subtle, but visible now. "That's not possible," she said, shaking her head slightly. "These percentages, this doesn't make sense." Brooklyn's gaze held hers. "It does," she said. "If you've been paying attention." A ripple moved through the room as a few people leaned closer, trying to understand what they were witnessing. Vanessa's hand tightened on the papers. "You're saying I'm saying," Brooklyn interrupted gently, "that I didn't come here to argue about the past." Another beat. "I came here because the present already belongs to me." Silence dropped, heavier than before. Vanessa's composure cracked, not loudly, but completely. The confidence, the control, the certainty she had carried into the room, it slipped, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to hold on to. Brooklyn didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She just stood there, steady, as the realization spread, slow, undeniable, irreversible. Because this wasn't revenge in words anymore. It was ownership. The silence didn't break right away, it deepened. Not the kind that fades, but the kind that forces everyone to look closer. And this time, they weren't looking at Brooklyn. They were looking at Vanessa. Her hands were still gripping the papers, but the control she once carried so effortlessly was gone. Not all at once, piece by piece. A slight tremor in her fingers. A delayed breath. A hesitation she couldn't hide. "Say something." One of the investors finally spoke, his tone no longer supportive, just expectant. Vanessa opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For a second too long, she just stood there. Brooklyn didn't interrupt. She didn't need to, because the room was already shifting. Another voice, quieter this time. "You didn't disclose this structure." A glance. Then another. Conversations didn't resume, they fractured. Low whispers. Side looks. The kind that spread faster than any announcement. Vanessa straightened slightly, trying to reclaim something, anything. This is being misinterpreted," she said, but even she could hear it. The lack of certainty. Brooklyn's expression didn't change. Calm. Distant. Final. "Is it?" she replied softly. That was enough. A single sentence, and whatever was left of Vanessa's authority slipped further. One of the partners closed his folder. Another stepped back, creating just a bit more distance. Subtle movements, but unmistakable. Vanessa noticed. Of course she did. Her eyes moved quickly now, searching for alignment that wasn't there anymore. "Wait, this isn't how this works," she said, her voice rising slightly, just enough to break. No one answered. And that was the moment. Not loud, not dramatic, but absolute. Because for the first time, Vanessa wasn't being followed. She was being questioned. And Brooklyn? She didn't step forward. She didn't press further. She simply let the truth stand, cold, clear, and impossible to ignore. The shift didn't stay contained within that room. It spread, fast, quiet, undeniable. By the next morning, calls started coming in. Not from investors this time, but from somewhere Brooklyn hadn't heard from in a long time. Her phone lit up with a familiar name. "Brooklyn, we need to talk." Her mother's voice came through, softer than she remembered, almost careful. Brooklyn didn't answer right away. She let the silence sit between them, just for a second. "About what?" she asked finally, her tone even. A pause. Then, "We didn't know it was like this." Brooklyn's gaze drifted toward the window, the city moving as usual outside. "You did," she replied quietly. No anger. No edge. Just truth. Later, her father tried. "You should have said something sooner," he insisted, as if the outcome had simply been a misunderstanding. Brooklyn exhaled slowly. "I did," she said. "You just didn't listen." The line went quiet. For a moment, there was space, something that once would have pulled at her, made her want to explain more, to fix it. But that pull wasn't there anymore. Because the need for their approval had already faded long before this moment. "I'm not calling to argue," her mother added, almost quickly. "We just didn't realize." Brooklyn closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, steady. "That's the point," she said. Another pause. This time, Brooklyn ended the call. Not abruptly. Not harshly. Just done. She set her phone down and leaned back slightly, the tension that had followed her for years finally loosening its grip. Nothing needed to be proven anymore. Nothing needed to be explained. And for the first time in a long time, she felt completely free. Brooklyn didn't go back to that house. Not out of anger, just because there was nothing left there that belonged to her anymore. The city outside her window moved at its usual pace, indifferent, steady, real. And for once, she matched that rhythm. No rush. No pressure to prove anything. She stood by the glass one morning, coffee in hand, watching people pass below. For years, She had chased something she thought she needed: recognition, validation, a moment where someone would finally say she was enough. "Look at me now," she whispered softly, almost testing the words. Then she shook her head slightly. No, that wasn't it. Because the truth felt quieter than that. Stronger, but quieter. Success hadn't come from being seen. It had come from continuing when no one was looking. From building when no one believed. From choosing to move forward without waiting for permission. Her phone buzzed again, another message, another request, another opportunity. This time, she didn't react immediately. She set it aside, letting it wait. Not everything needed her attention anymore. Brooklyn took a slow breath, her reflection faint in the glass. She didn't look for approval there. She didn't measure herself against anything. She just stood, certain. Because in the end, she hadn't taken anything back to prove them wrong. She had taken it back because it was always hers. And now, the story doesn't end with Brooklyn. It shifts to you. Because if you were standing in her place, after everything, the silence, the betrayal, the moment you were erased in your own home, what would you actually do? Would you walk away and let it go? Or would you come back and take everything that was yours? Think about it for a second. Not the easy answer, the real one. The one you don't say out loud. Forgive them, some people would say. Holding on to anger only hurts you. But does it? Or does walking away sometimes mean letting them win? Then there's the other side. Cut them off. Take it back. Make them feel it. But at what cost? Does reclaiming what's yours bring peace, or just a different kind of emptiness? There's no perfect answer here. That's what makes it uncomfortable. That's why it stays with you. So let's be honest right now. Which side are you on? Team forgive, you let it go, you move on, you choose peace over revenge. Team cut off, you don't forget, you don't forgive, and you take back what was yours. No middle ground. No safe answer. Drop your choice in the comments and explain why. Because the real question isn't what Brooklyn did. It's what you would do when the people who should have loved you are the ones who broke you first.